Today, we will be looking at two different learning goals for our probability lesson. First of all, number one, we're going to try and learn the difference between theoretical and experimental probability. And secondly, we're going to look at ways to describe probabilities in two different ways. First of all, with words like very unlikely, unlikely, likely, impossible, certain, etc. And finally, with fractions, like a 1 out of 2 probability or a 10 out of 15. If we look at a probability, we've already learned that a probability gives us an idea of the likelihood of an event. How probable is it that this event will actually happen? Today we did some work and we tried some little experiments. Those experiments, those probabilities we found from those with the dice, right, are called experimental probabilities. This means that we found a probability based on the results of an experiment. We didn't take a look at it theoretically. We just said, hey, how many times did we roll a 6 out of 10 rolls? So, taking a look at how we set up a probability when we do an experimental probability, the numerator or top number in our fraction is going to be the number of times of an outcome. So let's say that out of 10 rolls, we rolled 3 6s. Okay, so out of 10 rolls, we got 3 6s. And the number of times, so on the top here, we would be writing a 3. Right, so we roll 3 6s, we put a 3 on the number of times our outcome occurred. Now, if we take a look and we put down how many times we actually tried the experiment, we would be writing down 10. Okay? That would become our denominator, right? The denominator in a probability fraction is the number of times we actually tried our particular event, okay, or the number of times we conducted our experiment. Experimental probabilities are not the only kind of probabilities we'll take a look at. Okay? An experimental probability, like it says, can only come from conducting an experiment. Sometimes even without conducting an experiment, we can figure out a probability or the chance of something occurring. If we, for instance, flip a coin's got two possible outcomes, heads or tails. If we flip a coin and we're trying to look at the probability of getting heads, well, there's one head on the coin out of two possible choices, heads or tails. So we'd say the theoretical probability of landing on heads would be 1 out of 2. So to write a theoretical probability, we'd put the number of favorable outcomes on the top, in this case, how many heads are possible when you flip a coin. And on the bottom, we'd put down, well, what are the total number of things that could happen? So in this case, for a number of favorable outcomes, we would write 1 because there is only one chance of getting heads on a coin, and it would be out of 2 possible things that could happen, heads or tails. So our theoretical probability of getting heads would be 1 out of 2, or we can also look at that as 50% or half of the time. Let's look at another example. In this example, we have the students in Sergio's class, and they make a graph of their favorite sports. Then they put their names in a hat. Sergio draws a name without looking. Without looking is important because we want to make sure the results are fair. There can't be any bias going on. So every chance has to have everything that could occur has to have an equal chance of occurring. Looking at the graph, we can see that the choices the class picked were between gymnastics, biking, soccer, hockey, basketball, baseball, and swimming. But not all the choices were chosen equally. If we look over here, we can see that gymnastics was just chosen by 1 child. Soccer was picked by 8 students, for example. swimming by 4. Looking at all the results, we can see that 1 person chose gymnastics, 2 for biking, 8 for soccer, 5 for hockey, 6 for basketball, 4 for both baseball and swimming. It is important always to find out the total number of things that can happen when you have a probability question. That total number of possible outcomes always becomes the denominator or bottom of your fraction. In this case, if we add everything up, we will see that there is a total of 30 choices in the class, 30 students. So there are a total of 30 choices made by the students. So to recap, figuring out the probability of an event is almost always the same kind of exercise. You need to figure out the total number of things that could happen. In this case, there are 30 students in the class. That is always the denominator or the bottom of our probability fraction. The top of our probability fraction will always be, well, how many times is it possible to get the thing you're after or what you're looking for? In this case, gymnastics. And for this particular probability, there's only 1 person out of the 30 that chose gymnastics as their favorite. Therefore, the probability of getting the person who chose gymnastics is 1 out of 30, which is pretty unlikely. Not impossible, but pretty unlikely.